welcome to Beans and Breakdowns, a podcast dedicated to bridging the gap between specialty coffee and the heavy music community. On this episode, I'm joined by Les Beaux Plastiques, the producer behind Thotcrime. So grab a fresh cup of coffee and wake the fuck up! What's going on, caffeinated crew? Today on the podcast, I'm joined by Les Beaux Plastiques from the band Thotcrime. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing okay. It's middle of the afternoon. I had a pretty nice lunch. I've got a very lovely decaf next to me, so chilling out pretty hard.
Are you a caffeine avoider in the afternoon?
Yeah, I used to be the kind of person where I could drink like 12 Monsters in a day and not feel it. But as I've gotten into coffee more, because like I am a weird coffee person now, I'm trying to keep it as a treat rather than sort of relying on it to be awake. So after sort of midday, I try to stick to the decaf just to make sure that I'm not like tweaking by the time I go to bed.
Right. I can't help but I can't help going back to the weird coffee person comment, because there's only a certain select, I think, group of people that would use that terminology. And does this have to do with the master, James Hoffmann?
Absolutely, it does.
Wonderful.
That man has taught me so much about coffee and brought me so much joy.
I also have my membership card to the Cult of the Hoff. And so it's nice to meet somebody who, I would say mine was reignited because I used to work in coffee, and over time, just it became more of a substance of necessity than a substance of joy or like a pleasure.
Yeah.
And through the pandemic, watching his videos, I was like, okay, I got to get back there. Was the pandemic the launching place for you as well?
Yeah, I mean, I used to watch a lot of Loading Ready Run, and then I kind of fell off from that because I was busy getting drunk and having friends and not really being in the house that often. But then over the pandemic, I rediscovered their content, and their crew member Serge is a big coffee guy, and they did a series over the pandemic with Serge about coffee and how great it is. And I thought, ooh, I really want to this seems like a fun hobby. And then in sort of floating around coffee YouTube, I discovered James Hoffmann and his video with Tom Scott. And I was like, oh, this guy is going to make me love coffee. I can feel it. And then subscribed immediately.
Yeah, it was similar. I saw the Tom Scott one a little bit after, but then from that video I started following Tom Scott, which is a completely different animal of a YouTube journey.
It really is.
But I feel so much smarter now. So just useless knowledge that he brings to the table. Decaf of choice today. What is it?
There's a coffee roasters in Nottingham called Cartwheel, and I have tried coffees from all over Germany and all over France, all over America, but Cartwheel coffee is, to my mind, the best. And they do a decaf called Lego Man, and it goes toe to toe with any of their caffeinated beans, but you can enjoy it at like 11 at night when you just fancy a little treat. So yeah, that's always my go-to for the decaf.
I was in the UK a couple of years ago for like Outbreak Fest, and I went through London and Manchester. Admittedly, Manchester had coffee that I liked a lot more. But there were some places in London as well that were like unbelievable. And I've always been fascinated by how coffee culture, with the UK being such a tea associated place, how coffee culture
Yeah.
is so like rich there.
I feel like for a lot of British people, the journey with coffee either starts when you're like 4 because your parents drink coffee and you're like, I want to be like my parents.
Hmm.
Or you try it when you're 4, hate it, then you turn 30 and you try it again. And I think a lot of coffee culture in England, maybe, I can't speak for everyone, obviously, but I feel like a lot of it may be making up for lost time.
Hmm.
You're like, wait, some of these people have like 20 years of experience on me. What can I find out now?
My favorite coffee is an anaerobic, natural, thermic process. Just deep diving into all these weird coffees.
Yeah, it's funny because my sister was one of those that like she liked coffee when she was younger,
Hmm.
and she never really progressed past instant coffee, which is fair and valid. You know, some people drink because they like the taste, some people drink because they like to not think, and
Hmm.
it's the same with coffee, obviously. But me and my sister went to a concert in London to see the producer Ryoji Ikeda, who I love to pieces. And I said, hey, there's this really cool coffee shop just round the corner from our hotel. Can we go and get some? And she was like, yeah, sure, I love coffee. So I got us an AeroPress and I got us a siphon filter coffee.
Hmm.
And she did not understand a single thing that was going on. She tried to drink the siphon coffee fresh out of the brewer. That was a mistake. But by the end of it, she was saying, how can coffee taste so different depending on how you brew it? And I said, this is what I have been telling you for 2 years now.
Yeah. It's so many variables that affect the taste of coffee, but
There
even
really are.
just the brew method alone can have like a night and day difference.
Yeah. I mean, I used to use 16 grams of beans to 250 ml of water in my pour over because I've got a lovely Kalita 101 at home.
Hmm.
Now I use 17 grams of beans, and the difference is ridiculous. It's like night and day between the two,
Well, yeah,
just for
like
the 1 extra gram of coffee.
just upping the extraction a bit more.
Yeah,
Hmm.
just that so much more flavor, and it makes it kind of so much sweeter to me.
I was in Northern Europe, so I was in like Oslo, Stockholm, Copenhagen, um, in June, and I went to Tim Wendelboe while I was in Oslo, and they only do AeroPress for filter coffee.
Ooh.
And when I say I have never had a clean AeroPress before this point, I was blown away. I was like, this is better than most pour overs I've had. And then the iced coffee, I'm almost figured out how they got it to taste this way. I think it has to do a little bit with dilution, but
Mm.
I'm pretty sure it's a flash brew. And it tasted like iced black tea with like almost honey sweetness,
Ooh.
but it was just black filter coffee with ice.
Yeah.
So that's when that's even at the time where I'm like, I feel like I've had everything you can do in coffee almost and tried all these weird things. I go to like another shop and it's like, how did they even do this? I work in coffee and I have no idea how they made this coffee.
Yeah, that's I there used to be a place in Nottingham. It's not there anymore, unfortunately. It's called Effie. And my me and my mum were looking for somewhere new to try, so we went in there. And she had a latte from this 50-year aged Colombian. I didn't know that coffee could taste like whiskey. My mum took a sip and said, "The hell is this?" And I was like, "That tastes like whiskey, that does." And it's like how they manage that when it's literally just an espresso and milk.
Mhm. That's that's super weird. I had an aged coffee that tasted like rum,
Mm.
and I'm sure on espresso it probably tasted a lot better, but on pour over I just could not get past it. It was
I can
super,
imagine.
it just
I
wasn't right.
I know that like there are people that seem to think that Cafe Corretto can be improved, but I don't. Rum and coffee for me are very different kind of flavors that I like on their own. The idea of putting them together doesn't sound particularly fun.
No. Unless it's like a maybe like a tiki cocktail or something, I could understand that,
Mm,
but it'd have to be like blended really well.
yeah.
But yeah, just straight whiskey or a straight rum with coffee flavor is like almost towards the end of the cup. I wanted to like barf because it's like this tastes like I'm either getting drunk or I'm just drinking spoiled coffee. Like I don't, my palate isn't good enough for this. But I'll tell you what I'm drinking today. Um, I have a washed Ethiopian coffee called Bekele from Ethica, which is out of Toronto.
Mm,
I had a um, espresso one time from Hamilton, which is kind of like south of Toronto, and it's a natural Ethiopian, and it was one of the best espressos I've ever had. But it was from Ethica, the same roastery, and my friend was there recently and asked if I wanted some beans. So I was like, "Oh, try to get that natural Ethiopian," but they didn't have it. So
oh,
instead, he got me this washed one. So shout out to Dylan. He plays in a band called Rust from Toronto. Very good band. He was also in a band called Like Pacific for a bit. Um, so very, very solid dude. So he gave me this coffee. Yeah, I love it. It's jasmine, lemon, and black tea notes. And I did this on a V60.
oh, hell yeah. I really want to get my hands on a V60 because, like, my Kalita is lovely, but I feel like it finishes too clean.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I kind of, when I go to a coffee shop and I get a pour over on a V60, it has just that little bit more dirt. Like, it's got a bit more girth in the bottom end.
Mm-hmm.
And then I come home and I make it on my Kalita and it's very nice, but I'm like, it's not dirty enough.
I understand. I've never gotten into the Kalita game, even though a lot of the older coffee people they swear by it because it was one of the OG kind of hyped methods. But the shop that I started working in 10 years ago did V60. And so when I got back into coffee and watched some of Hoffman's videos, and he was like, I've got the best V60 recipe. I was like, let's go. We're going back in. V60 it is.
If that's what the Hoffman says, that's what I do.
I just follow that wave. Now I'm like, how do I get an espresso machine? I
That
don't
is
even,
the real question, isn't it?
I don't have that disposable of an income. Okay.
I got an advert on Instagram a couple of months ago that was like second hand, top quality espresso machine, only £60. And I sent the link to my sister and I said, does this look like a scam to you? Because my wallet is already open.
But how talk what that there's so many details that I need to know about this now. What did it tell you what kind it was?
It didn't. And that was one of the things that tipped me
Oh.
off. And like I clicked on the page and they were like, it is espresso machine. I'm like, how many espresso machine? Yes,
Ah.
it has milk wand. What type of milk wand? No,
No. Does it have a solenoid valve? What?
it has a top.
You plug it in. Oh no. Oh no.
If things seem too good to be true, especially in the world of espresso, they're too good to be true.
If I've learned anything from the hours and hours of James Hoffman and Lance Hendrick videos, it is that. That is the number one rule is that it is too good to be true.
It's like, yeah, you can get an espresso machine from the supermarket for like 90 quid, but that's probably for if you are not a fan of coffee and don't care what it tastes like.
Yeah. Even the coffee brewers, like the filter brewers, I feel like you can pay less to get a nice batch brewer,
Hmm.
but it does come at a cost. Like it comes at a quality cost.
Yeah. And like it's really kind of I find espresso especially, but coffee in general to be one of those things where the more money you spend on a thing, the better the quality of coffee you're going to get.
Yes.
But the increase curves exponentially down as the cost curves exponentially up. Like there's one I saw, um, I can't remember the name of it now, but it was an Italian company, obviously, it's espresso.
Hmm.
And they do this absolutely beautiful machine that can do four espresso at once, which is way more than you would ever need at home. But that was somewhere in the region of 6 grand. And I thought, how many of my internal organs do I need?
That's the thing. I think what is it? A kidney you can get like 10,000 for. So you just gotta
Come
get
and
rid of
buy
one.
your come and buy your official Thotcrime branded kidneys.
I'm also bad at saving money for things. So it's like a double-edged sword.
Yeah, it's the kind of having multiple hobbies as well kind of doesn't help. And being a musician as well, because then it's technically not spending money on a hobby, it's a business expense, but no one's going to reimburse you. And it's like, oh, like I need a new laptop. No one's going to help me. Okay, that's 2 grand out the window.
Yep. At least you're not a podcaster because like you can play enough shows and like sell music and stuff like that or merch and be like, okay, we need some money to fund this and help pay for it. But it's like podcast, no money, and you need a new laptop. It's like nobody cares. Just, you
Where's
just
the new episode? My laptop died, but where's the new episode? I'm
I'm gonna launch a Patreon. No, fuck you, no.
not paying for your free content. Where's the new episode?
We went behind the scenes footage. I trust me, you don't want behind the scenes footage. You don't want that. I will give you brew guides or I will give you nothing. Boo, we don't like coffee. We just want cold brew. That's the gist of it. How do you feel about cold brew?
It's a thing that I've not really kind of I haven't tried it, but not for any reason other than I've been enjoying the world of hot coffee
Mm-hmm.
a bit much. Like every time I've been on tour with the girls, almost every stop they'll get cold brews or they'll get iced coffees or what have you. And it'll be like 107 degrees in the middle of the desert. And I'll be like, yes, I would like a cappuccino, please. And they're like, you know that that's going to be boiling hot. I'm like, well, yeah, that's the point. I drink hot coffee. I cannot help this. But yeah, so like I'm aware of it and like I've been given a lot of very good recommendations for places that do really good cold brew.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've also been told Starbucks, so I don't listen to those friends about their opinions. Um, but it's just kind of I'm the kind of person where I need to be in a very specific frame of mind to try something new.
Right.
Um, and especially as I'm still very much enjoying cappuccinos and espressos and pour overs, there's nothing in my brain that's really sort of pulled me towards cold brew or iced coffee yet. I can imagine it happening in the not too distant future. It just hasn't happened yet.
It's when you get too hot and you're like, I can't do this.
I was sat there once with a bottle of water that had been in the fridge and my fresh out the kettle pour over. And I'd sip the coffee and be like, too hot, drink the water, too cold. And by the end of it, they were both mid temperature, but
Yes, they reach the median like average. Yeah, the cold brew and the iced coffee thing is I find it very, very American.
mm,
Like even when I go to I don't know, because actually, when I was in Scandinavia, most places had flash brew. Um, but in the UK, I was hard pressed because my wife loves cold brew and iced coffee. Hard pressed to find like a good iced coffee. I don't know if that's just a cultural thing.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to be a much more, it sort of depends on the city, really. Like, I know that there's a fair few places in Nottingham that do cold brews and iced coffees. And I know that there are places in London, but London is kind of a country in its own function, really.
Mm-hmm.
So, what's really popular in like the near the palace, for example, may be completely unheard of down like Essex way.
Mm-hmm.
And like what's big in Camden might not be somewhere else within London itself. So,
That at Camden, I will say I had a Gesha cold brew.
ooh.
It was mind blowing. It was probably the best cold brew I had the whole time I was in the UK. And I don't even like cold brew.
I've
So
still not had chance to try a geisha yet.
it's in the States, I think you can find them pretty easily,
Mm,
but it's just finding it for not $1 million.
yeah. This we were in a coffee shop and someone said to me, "Why is that coffee so expensive?" I said, "That is a geisha coffee." They said, "What makes that special?" I said, "Geisha coffee doesn't want to exist."
That's the best. That's the best explanation I've ever heard.
They were like, "What do you mean?" I say, "You plant like 3 fields of that. You're going to get maybe 20 kilos of beans." They were like, "That's obscene." I was like, "Yeah, that's why it's expensive."
Yeah. I paid, how much was it? I think I paid for 100 gram tin in Houston one time. I think there was only 90 kilos ever made or something like this of this coffee.
Yeah.
It was the last of it. And I think I paid $50
Ooh,
US for 100 grams.
ouch.
It was worth it.
Oh yeah, no, like I can imagine, but that's a big overhead in it.
Yeah, I tried to make it last as long as possible. I still have the tin. Um, but yeah, it was this it's more like the story behind it too. It was very sentimental, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, if
But
you're traveling, then you're not gonna like pick up a can of Folgers or something and be like, "Look what I got." Whereas like um one time when I went to visit my girlfriend who lives in Germany, um I'd been saying that I just really wanted to find somewhere in Germany to have coffee.
Mhm.
Because she's not a coffee person, she's a tea drinker. I got her to try some coffee once. She looked like a cat that had just licked a lemon. It was quite adorable. Um, we found this place called Highland Coffee. It's like regular Highland, but with a T on the end. And on their wall of like sellables, I saw that they had a Singaporean coffee, and I'd never heard of that before. And I was very intrigued. So I bought that.
Mhm.
And luckily, it was really, really nice. But more to the point, I have this fancy bag of Singaporean coffee that I can be like, look, I am cultured. This is a souvenir more than it is a drink.
Yes.
It's a good
You
drink, though.
you've got to have those the novelties on your
Yeah.
coffee wall.
Because I feel like to a certain degree, even if like you have a stockpile of your favorites, after a while, you sort of think, I could go for something a bit different today.
Hmm.
And I feel like if I'm going to go for something a bit different, I'm going to go like all in on that and
Hmm.
find something really off the wall. There's a company called Caravan who are great, based out of London.
Hmm.
And every year they do a Christmas blend. and I have been slowly building up my collection of their Christmas tins because it's something a bit different and it's Christmassy and it tastes like pudding and it's very nice.
I I'm a Christmas blend like sucker. Like there's a roaster here in town that I used to live next to called Structure, and they have a Christmas blend they do every year called Punch de Fête, and it is really really nice. Very very kind of traditional, but like warm and cozy.
Mm,
I think it's like an Ethiopian Colombia blend or something. It's just very easy, um,
yeah.
but it's warm. Like it's just a good cozy blend. And sometimes, like, I'm not a blend guy. I'm not, I mean, I usually go for the funky stuff. And
Yeah.
there's just something nice every once in a while. Like maybe it's snowy one morning and it's lazy and I want something traditional, you know?
Yeah.
But
I
yeah.
yeah, because I tend to like coffees that are a bit more earthy, have maybe a bit less spike in the high end.
Hmm.
And with obviously with the Kalita pour over, it exemplifies the bits I like anyway.
Right.
Um, so I tend to go for a Guatemalan. There's one farm in Guatemala called Santa Rosa, and they are my favorite. And I so difficult to find bags of that. But again, it's a very kind of it's a very middle of the road coffee, not in terms of like quality, obviously. It's just like if flavor is this big sprawling D&D alignment chart, then this Guatemalan is a true neutral. And sometimes I don't want that. Sometimes I want to get out, like you say, get out the Christmas blend, have it be lawful good, give me a big hug whilst I'm drinking it in my onesie. And it is just cozy. Like when they're like, oh, it tastes like Christmas tree, it's like that doesn't mean anything. Just tell me if it's going to feel like my stomach is going to smile at me.
Yep. Like if you can drink it on its own with like, say, like a nice eggs and bacon,
Oh,
or
yes.
you can make it in like an espresso, like a homemade espresso martini, you know? You should be able to do all things with a Christmas blend.
Yeah, it needs to battle on many fronts.
It's a jack of all trades.
I
It's gonna carry me right through the season.
mean, I made one of them. You remember that Dalgana coffee?
Oh yes.
I made that once with some Christmas blend. I ground it as fine as I could, whipped it up into this froth, and I was like, this brew method is not worth it for the effort you put in, but the Christmas does it so nicely.
I think that was the conclusion I came to as well. I'm like, this is interesting. I will never ever do this ever again. And I think actually James Hoffman did a video making it and showed
Yeah,
basically like the macros of how much caffeine, how much sugar is in a serving.
yeah,
And it was like a dangerous amount almost.
yeah. I don't think I'm ever going to do it again, if I'm honest. I think, the fact that my teeth felt furry for a week afterwards was enough to convince me that this is a one-time thing for novelty, but
Mhm.
otherwise.
I can't handle the dental bill. It's not for me. I There's a shop in town. It's a like a Japanese shop.
Ooh,
Um, but they will sometimes do the seasonal drink where it's like a Hong Kong milk tea latte,
ooh.
and it's espresso with kind of like milk tea mixed in, iced.
Hmm.
One of the most fantastic drinks I've ever had. And that's basically as sweet as I'm willing to go.
Yeah.
Um, because it felt like a cavity, just an iced cavity. So yeah,
Yeah.
I can't in my 30s, it's the time to settle down. These teeth ain't lasting forever.
That is far too relatable.
Plus the acidic those acidic beans will get you.
Yeah, like that's the other reason I try not to drink coffee so much because like we got messed around by dentists a lot when I was younger, and everyone in my family has like some pretty bad dental problems. And I don't really want to hurry that along any more than I kind of have to.
Hmm.
Which, some weeks is very hard, where I'm either like just in the vicinity of good coffee or stressed.
Right.
But on the day to day, it's like I, it's the toss up, isn't it, between I want to enjoy this lovely thing and I don't want to have to go and see the dentist 5 times a year.
That's last time I went and saw my dentist. They were like, do you drink a lot of coffee? I was like, yes, I do. Yes, I work in coffee, but yes. Um, and they're like, okay, you need to rinse after every cup. Like every single time you drink coffee, just wash your mouth out.
Yeah.
They're like, that's going to at least just help with the acidity. So I've started trying to do that as much as possible. I also drink max like 3 cups a day,
Yeah.
but it used to be worse. So yeah, it's just, you got to take preventative measures.
Yeah. And this everything in moderation in it.
It is. That's,
It's like not stretching before or after a workout.
mm,
Like you got to have the water there, otherwise, all you're doing is damage.
it's true. It's a fine line.
Yes.
um, well, as much as I love talking about coffee, some listeners will complain that there's 30 minutes of coffee talk in this episode. And to them, I say, I don't care. Um, but I think we should maybe talk about some music.
Yes, I do love music.
How did you get into heavy music?
Um, I mean, when I was younger, like when I was a wee small thing, uh, back when I was just a nipper, my family didn't really have like a lot of money. Um, so like all I really had to entertain myself before I had a Game Boy was my mum's old cassette player and
Mm.
whatever tapes were lying around. So I started sort of just listening to whatever was about, not really paying much attention to it. And then as I got a little bit older and I started becoming more aware of music, I was into like hip hop and I was into French house.
Nice.
So it was very kind of sedate and fun music to listen to whilst I watched the ceiling,
Hmm.
which is a thing that's very much continued in my life. But then when I was about 13, my sister was 15, she brought home an issue of Kerrang and it had the Rasmus on the front cover. And we were like, holy crap, this is like the coolest thing we've ever seen. Like, this dude has feathers in his hair and is wearing black. So at the next opportunity, we went out, bought their album Dead Letters, which is still to my mind one of the best albums ever made. And we were like, yo, this is so cool and it sounds so angry and so heavy. Little did we know at the time, but this was like the heaviest thing on the planet for us when we were teenagers. And then my sister kind of latched onto the punk aspect of it and sort of went down that route. So she got into bands like My Chemical Romance and Billy Talent,
Hmm.
and then on into bands like Fever 333 and Enter Shikari. Whereas I kind of went down the more technical side of things. And I started discovering bands like Trivium and Dragon Force and just all that like edgelord heavy metal. So by the time I turned like 15 and my parents were like, "Oh, what do you want for Christmas or your birthday?" I'd be like, "Metal CDs." And over the years, I've rediscovered other aspects of music, but there was a period of time where like I would only listen to the Nymphetamine album by Cradle of Filth. Like I just had that on repeat for about 2 years.
It's dark.
Yeah, like it's no wonder I turned out a little bit weird. And then of course, like when I say of course, as though people know this. When I turned 14, I think it was, my dad bought me a guitar for Christmas. It was some rubbish knockoff thing from the supermarket that came with the most badly built practice amp. And I started looking for things to learn to play
Mhm.
because I wasn't really interested in sort of Wonderwall or Comfortably Numb or any of that. Um, and I started discovering bands like Atreyu and Avenged Sevenfold and Slipknot.
Mhm.
And I was like, oh, this is really fun to play. So kind of my gateway was a combination of being undersupervised as a kid and then being given a guitar.
Mhm. Great combination.
Yeah.
Um, it's interesting to know like the people in that era, like when you get a guitar, I don't know why like a lot of people in our age group straight up gravitated towards the most like kind of it's not the most, but like more obscure because guitar music was obviously very big at the time.
Yeah.
Like it's been big since the 80s and 70s even, but like what was it that was so attractive to like bands like Slipknot and Atreyu? Because it's really weird and aggressive. And I mean, I didn't see myself as the most aggressive, 13, 14-year old, like
Yeah.
going to church and playing drums to church music. But like that's what caught my attention as well. So I always find it very interesting that it's like you could just learn to play Wonderwall, or you could just learn to play like, you know, whatever was big at the time in rock, like Foo Fighters or something. But
Mm.
instead, yeah, it's like I want to shred. Like,
Yeah, like I want to do the tappy and make the sweeps. I want to make my guitar sound like a computer crashing.
yeah. I'm gonna need a guitar with a full Floyd Rose setup because this isn't doing it for me, boss.
It's funny because like I never got on with the Floyd Rose.
Mm-hmm.
Like our guitarist uses a PRS SE24, beautiful thing. I
Mm-hmm.
have been far too scared to ask her if I can have a go on it because it's too pretty. But that's obviously got the floating trem on it, and
Right.
I I don't know if it's me. I don't know if it's just that I'm not used to them, but I look at a floating tremolo and the entire guitar goes out of tune. Like I don't even have to touch it. So I've been a very dedicated fixed bridge kind of person my entire life.
Right.
Because then, at the very least, if I do decide to smack my guitar about, which I do, um, it is a bit more forgiving.
That's for a long time because I came more from hardcore and even metalcore. There was not a lot of Floyd's, which I was definitely a MySpace into Facebook era metalcore person.
Mm.
Um, and it was all about like the EC 1000 for everything, the LTDs. And it wasn't until I started trying to write death metal that I was like, you know what? I think I want to give a go at the Floyds. And honestly, floating trims, same. I look at a floating trim, I think of a floating trim, and one goes out of tune somewhere. You know what I mean? Every time a bell rings, a floating trim goes out of tune. But
If your guitar isn't in tune today, it's because we were talking about it.
exactly, just across the universe, the floating trims are going out of tune everywhere. Um, but I got the like an Ibanez version of a Floyd,
Yeah.
and I'll be honest, I've whipped that thing around quite a bit, and it stays.
Mm.
So maybe that's the life hack. I just every time people are like Floyd's are so inconvenient, it's like just watch a YouTube video on how to set it up and you're fine.
Yeah. I think that's the other thing. Like, because I've never owned one, I've never had one set up for me and how I play.
Right.
So it's kind of, I feel like if you want a floating trem, if it's like a Floyd or if it's an Edge Zero, or even if you're going for like a Bigsby or something, you
Hmm.
really just kind of need to jump in with both feet and say, this is what I'm doing now. And then, find a YouTube video or a luthier or a tech that you trust and say, I'm going to smack this thing like it's in a 90s rap song. Can you set it up for me?
Just think of West Borland. That's me. I'm gonna do that stuff. Just that's what I need. Can you can you put it in B standard? Um, I feel like that's a luthier's worst nightmare, honestly. B standard on a locking trim.
Yeah.
um, what is cyber grind?
So Cybergrind is basically in the 90s, a bunch of grindcore bands decided that they wanted to sound more unlistenable. And they replaced their drummers with a 909 drum machine and
Mm-hmm.
then just distorted the hell out of it. And sometimes they'd be like, okay, but two guitarists is one too many, so we'll get rid of you and replace that with a sequencer running through like a 303 and distort the hell out of that. Uh, and it's basically just sort of what if grindcore was made by machines rather than humans that walk like machines.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. I remember talking with Rich. I think it was like, oh man, it had to be over a year ago
Hmm.
that we were talking. And he was saying that he had started working with Thotcrime, and I was giving it a listen. I think it was like a few singles out. I don't even think that y'all had a like a full EP out at the time.
Yeah.
And um, I was like, I love this, but also I don't know if I understand what's going on, but I like it. And just because like I loved listening to a lot of crazy like grindcore when I was in high school. And it was like the time where it was almost like deathcore grindcore, like the Dr. Acula days.
Yeah.
So when people say grindcore, I think of Dr. Acula, even though it's not a grindcore band by any means. Um, but it was sassy. And so that's kind of why I was like, oh yeah, this is very, very much what I listened to in high school. Um, so like I always kind of wondered where it got that, because obviously you guys are not the first, like y'all are not the
No.
first cyber grind band,
We're
but
not even the first in the Cybergrind revival that we're currently in.
right. But I think that y'all do it really, really well. And it's
Thank
like
you.
it's very fun to listen to, especially I think with connection anxiety. It's a bit different than the singles that I was listening to. It's very much more like formulated, it feels like. It's got
Yeah.
like a story. There's a lot more singing and a lot more like,
Yeah.
yeah, like melody involved.
Because when we did our first album on your computer,
Mm-hmm.
we basically, me and Melody, our guitarist, were in a Discord server together. And one day she just posts in there, does anyone want to start a cyber grind band? And I said, I have no idea what that is, but I'm down. So I messaged her, and I've still got a screenshot of this message because it's an important day. It was the 9th of July, 2019. And we just started sending these demos back and forth. And, she had been listening to a lot of Zombie Shark and she'd been listening to a lot of Blind Equation
Mm-hmm.
and bands like that, as well as like Discordance Axis and Dr. Acula. Whereas I'm like really into things like drum and bass and glitch hop and dubstep. So I was kind of trying to approach grindcore from the perspective of a producer, whereas Melody was trying to approach electronic music from the perspective of a grindcore fan.
Mm-hmm.
And the result of that was a very intense and mad album. The number of times I'd send a mix over and we'd be like, that's completely unlistenable. Let's find a vocalist. And then on the second album, Digital Drift,
Hmm.
we'd already written most of it before we signed with Prosthetic. Um, so there was still a lot of holdovers from the first album, kind of ideas that we'd been using or techniques we'd been using. Um, and we were still kind of on that. We're not really a band, so we're never going to have to play this live, so don't worry about it.
Right.
And then we decided to play it live, so we started worrying about it. But then when it came to writing for Connection Anxiety, we already knew that we were releasing it on Prosthetic,
Hmm.
and we knew that at some point we were going to have to play this live. So we should probably write guitar parts that a human can play. Um, and whilst we were working on demos and sort of building them up, we noticed that our favorites, 'cause we had 40 or 50 demos, and the 10 we picked out, we were like, these are all 90s and noughties rave songs. So what if we just like make a grindcore rave album and like, we'll have the drum and bass song and we'll have the French house song and we'll have the
Hmm.
EDM song. And obviously the PC music song, which is becoming a bit of a staple for us.
Yep.
Um, so I feel like whilst not necessarily intentionally a more cohesive work, it ended up being like a much more sort of directed body of work because as soon as we latched onto that idea of we're making a rave album, suddenly we had a very clear direction of where to go, where in the past we were just making songs until they were done.
That because the PC glitchy stuff seemed to be the brand. Listening to the past things, and then now, like I said, it seems very much more conceptual.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, like I say, once we had the direction locked in and we sort of knew where we were heading to, our singer Haley said, I want to make this a concept album. I want to have these threads running through it.
Hmm.
Um, and obviously, like you said, with the singing, we only realized a couple of months ago that our first album had one song with clean singing on it at all. And we were like, how did we let that get past us? So on this one, we were focusing much more on kind of making songs and sort of trying to, instead of let's make a million different synths per song, let's use the same few synth sounds on everything
Hmm.
to pull it all together and sort of give the listener's ear more of something to grab onto. And of course, the live guitars actually being played by a human this time and recorded definitely help with that. Because in the past, it was all MIDI.
Hmm.
But on this album, we wrote everything, and then Melody sat down in a computer room for like 2 weeks, locked herself away completely, and then was like, here's a zip file of all the guitars. And did an incredible job. And I think that as well helps make the album feel more connected to itself rather than some songs.
Yeah, like the first thing, because it opens with like real guitar
Yeah.
and what feels like real drums. Because in the past, it's like you said, it feels like this blown out 909 like insanity. And then this one, I was like, oh whoa, this could be a real drummer. I mean,
The
it
funny thing about the drums is, and we keep getting compliments on how well recorded they are, and they're not, they're
no,
all MIDI.
yeah.
But like from the get-go, because I am like a death metal drum and bass producer,
Hmm.
I'm kind of, I get a little bit obsessive over making things sound clean and making things sound as real as can be done when we're intentionally making it robotic. And people keep saying, I don't know if that's a real drummer or not. Um,
That's
but on this
such a
album,
compliment.
it really is. But on this album, our drummer Dot composed all of the drum tracks except for on The Wrong Way because that is just a 909.
Hmm.
Um, and Z did a fantastic job with like the little bits of velocity automation so that it's not all just brick wall. Like it almost sounds like how a human's body would be able to play it if a human could do blast beats at 300 beats a minute.
Those kicks get a little fast.
Hmm.
So pulling it off live, is it you have a record version and then you have a live version? Is that the approach that y'all have been taking?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, on the last tour, when there were the four of us, obviously the guitars, we on some of these tracks, we've got like six different guitars going off at any moment,
Mhm.
but we only have one guitarist. So Melody would take care of like a combination of rhythm and lead at the same time.
Right.
Still not sure how she does that, but she does. And then we'll have like ambient guitars or incidental bits in the samples. And then when Dot was playing, um, obviously human beings can't do 126 notes. So we'd simplify it down a little bit, not by a lot, mind.
Right.
Then Haley sings, and then I have Ableton Live set up. So I've got like a track with all the bass loops and then all the drum loops, all the synth loops. And we sort of rebuild the songs from loops live. But obviously, because it is all live, there is plenty of room to mess up.
Mm-hmm.
And with having a human playing guitar, there's room for that to be different from night to night. So the live version sounds close to the recorded version by virtue of the fact that we have to have playback in some capacity.
Right.
But the way we do it invites a lot of improvisation and a lot of room for changing things up. So, yeah, like the live version is very different from the studio version, but not necessarily in a way that most people that have seen us can articulate.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people come up to us and they say, "How does that sound so much better than the album?" And I'm like, "I don't know.
That's
I'm
crazy.
I just press buttons."
I'm I, I'm the wrong person to ask for that. I I've grown to enjoy this idea of bands doing a like an album version and live they kind of switch it up. I think that's such a it's kind of like an artistic liberty that gets overlooked because a lot of bands, especially in like metal and genres that insist on very clear accuracy and precision. Um, I think Jesus Piece was one of the first bands I talked to where they intentionally do things live differently than they do on the record because they like that kind of change up and it keeps the audience interested. Like you don't know what you're gonna kind of get. And so I think that it's cool that even, with Thotcrime, you're able to have this really crazy, like over the top electronic production, but then live, when you introduce the human aspect, it's still great, still enjoyable to watch, but it's still very different. But artistically, it's interesting.
I mean, one of the really fun things about the way we perform is um, because we have like everything broken down into the smallest pieces possible. And like, let's say our singer needs to get some water or Melody needs to change guitars. I can remix songs on the fly live and just sort of fill the time that
Mm-hmm.
we're taking so that we never have to kind of let it fall into silence. Because I know a big thing for our guitarist is she's not a fan of bands taking like 25 minutes to introduce a song.
Mm-hmm.
And like I've been to shows as well where they're like, this next one, and then they start going through their life story. And I think, can we just music, please?
Just let it speak for itself.
So
Like
And like other things that we can do as well, because we do all the production ourselves, is On the Wrong Way, which in the studio is just synths and a drum machine and Haley's voice.
Hmm.
Um, Before we went off on this last tour, I said to Melody, what if I replace the drums in the last chorus with an quote unquote acoustic kit? And what if I put a bass guitar on there in the same vein as the rest of the album? And then you can come in with power chords and I can scream behind what Haley's singing. And, we can make this big change to the set that isn't just me pressing buttons and Haley doing karaoke for a song. And that ended up going down like really well
Hmm.
because this is, big emotional stripped back song about being true to yourself. And then when we were playing it live and we had the guitars on it and we had the new drums and the bass that I'd written, people were throwing punches to this song about acceptance, and it's like, that's quite funny.
Oh, that's why I love heavy music. This song is about being true to yourself. Now mosh your asses off.
I mean, another thing about the sample based method is the last song in our set list, which is the last song on Connection Anxiety, My Final Escape.
Hmm.
There's just before the final breakdown, there's just this synth that goes e. And we can keep that going for as long as we want to live. So I just keep that rolling for like a solid 30 seconds and say, right, insert name of city here. This is your last chance. And, people are like stood there waiting for me to tell them to go. And I can just stand there and go, hey, I'm not going to press the button yet. And they're like, come on, let me mosh. I'm like, all right then, as it's you. And I love like being able to do that. Like it really is the best of both worlds with Thotcrime Live between a band show and a DJ set.
Hmm.
Like we get to do so many fun things that a lot of bands can do or can sort of do, but they have to have everything on rails and they have to be like, okay, at exactly 27 minutes and 34 seconds and zero point 0.2 microseconds, this happens. Whereas we get a lot more freedom to like have more fun
Hmm.
and not be like one of the reasons I decided that I wanted to do this in the band. And the reason why I did it in previous bands is because a lot of bands have backing tracks and like to pretend they don't.
Right.
And then people are like, oh, you use backing tracks. That must mean you're miming. Whereas when you put the tracks on stage and you have someone very visibly controlling them, and like when we do these electro jams between songs and people can really hear and see what I'm doing, they're much more willing to just say, oh, they're using samples rather than say they're using samples. So it kind of lets us get away with a lot more silliness as well as do a lot more silliness.
Right. I haven't thought about that. It's like opening the curtain to show the wizard. It's
Yeah,
like there's a wizard here. Just that's the basis. And then people are like, oh, that's cool. As
that's
opposed
the
to,
thing.
yeah.
Like we've had people like someone tried to draw me into a argument with Rings of Saturn on Twitter once. And like I like Rings of Saturn. I don't have a problem with anything they're doing. But they were like, "Oh, you must be talking about people that use backing tracks." And I'm like, "Hey, buddy, Thotcrime uses backing tracks. You accept it because you can see them, but like we're not much different."
Same idea, just different execution.
Exactly. Because like, that we've got songs where there's 5-part harmonies and there's only 3 of us on stage. So how else are we supposed to bring this across in the way that we want to, unless we hire a choir, which a band our size can't afford?
No. And most venues can't handle that many people on stage anyway. So
God, yeah. I mean, the place we played in Vegas, they had a stage, but it was more designed for comedy open mic nights.
Nice.
There's like a quarter of a circle sticking out from the wall by like a foot at most. And I'm just imagining, okay, and this is where we're going to set up the bleachers for the string section.
That's very funny. The whole thing with the backing tracks and bands, I find myself having to do explainers as like a person who has played in bands that use backing tracks and things, because it's like you expect to hear the songs how they're recorded, but
Hmm.
listen with your real ears. Like listen with your actual ears and then look at the amount of people that are on in the band.
Yeah.
Like we don't even have a keyboard player, but there's a whole synth part in this one song that you love. How do you expect us to do that? You just don't want to hear it live because we can just turn it off. It's like,
This is one of the things that I've found as well. Like people that will complain about bands that use backing tracks, they'll go and see the band, and either, the playback system will be dodgy that night, or the front of house sound is going to turn those synths way down.
mhm.
And people are like, oh, that didn't sound so good. What was the difference? And it's like the thing that you hate is the difference, or the thing you think you hate, but actually really like.
hmm it's all like this perception, and whoever, it's the Twitter, the Twitter elitism that I don't understand because it seems to be fueled by people who don't actually play music. I don't know
Yeah. I
what this.
mean,
Yeah.
there's a band called Bloody Wood who are incredible. Met them once. They played in Manchester, and I met them and I said, hey, I'm in a bad way. My granddad just died. So the singer grabbed my hand and took, there's lightning outside. The singer grabbed my hand and took me to meet and have a photo with every band member. And they were really cool. And someone uploaded a video of their set to YouTube. And I commented on it saying, this is one of the best things I've ever seen live. And someone replied to me saying, well, you know that like all modern bands, it's all backing tracks, right? And I was like, number one, it's not, because they made mistakes and you can clearly hear them. Number two, I don't care. Like for me, a live performance is a lot like theatre.
hmm
You're not saying, look at how much I can play. You're not saying, hey, dude, look how hard I can piss. You're putting on a show.
Yep.
And if some of that has to be augmented by stuff that you've already played just in the past, I don't understand why it's such a make or break thing for so many people.
I think it comes down to ignorance.
Hmm.
It's people don't understand what tracks and what samples actually are.
Yeah.
So they're like, it's cheating. And it's like, we're not doing karaoke
Yeah.
because we have amps turned up really loud and a real drum kit on the stage. It's just that those extra bits that make it sound real good, we want to use those live too because we played them.
Yeah. I mean, the question you got to ask yourself is like, at what point is it not cheating anymore? Like, okay, we don't use tracks, but we use a click. That's cheating. Okay, we don't use a click, but our amps are mic'd up. That's cheating. Okay, nothing's mic'd up. The vocalist is just shouting at you. That's cheating because your guitars are plugged in. It's like, where does it end?
My favorite was the triggered kicks. Do you remember when people thought that if you used a trigger on your kick drum, that the drummer basically could kick once and it would do the whole pattern perfectly?
There was, yeah. I mean, I unfortunately, when I was younger, was one of those. I was like, triggers aren't real. I mean,
Yeah,
these days, I prefer the sound of an acoustic kick to like the standard metalcore kick.
the kick
That's
10.
just, yeah, that's just personal preference.
Mm-hmm.
But like, as I've gotten deeper in, again, it's ignorance. As I get deeper into production and learning about how to make an album, um, I've learned a lot more that like these are just tools. And if you've got a drummer who kicks once and it does all of bleed for them, with no human interaction. Like, that's not a thing. That's a straw man that disgruntled drummers on Twitter have invented.
Yep. Like I've learned the big difference because as a drummer and having to record parts before, sometimes kick patterns are fast and sometimes that microphone can't register all those little air bits. Like they can't register unless you mic it really, really well. Sometimes the kick's too fast. And
Yeah.
so
And
if you
because
got
of
yeah,
because of the way the drum skins and the microphones work, sometimes an acoustically mic'd kick, the pattern will just get lost
mm-hmm.
because either you'll happen to hit the kick as the skin is at its most stretched, so you're not going to make the proper contact. And then if the mic isn't pointing directly at the millimeter where the beater makes that contact, it's just going to sound like a. And you've got two options really. You can either augment it with samples, which is apparently cheating, or you can use triggers, which is apparently cheating.
Right. Or like I've started using on certain projects a kick pad. Like it's a Roland E drum pad
Hell yeah.
into a brain and it gives me MIDI. And I'll be hard pressed to have the layman listen and tell me that that's not a real kick drum. And what's great is there's no kick drum in any of the other drum mics, so editing is insanely easy.
That's the other thing. Like, one very popular technique is to have triggers on the kick and the snare, not actually triggering anything, just opening a gate for the
Mm-hmm.
acoustic kick and snare. And people are like, you're using triggers, that's cheating. And they're like, no, I'm literally just using it to make my mix cleaner.
People do it live now.
Yeah.
I've watched. There's a drum tech for A Day to Remember, and he's also the drum tech for Luke Holland with the word or not the word alive, Falling in Reverse, which cringe band, but this guy's content is very good. Um, and people were like, "Why are there triggers on the drums?" And he's like, "It's for the gates. It's
Yeah.
so that the front of house engineer can trigger the gates to open exactly when he hits the drums."
It's another thing that I feel like a lot of people don't understand is like live mixing isn't just put a couple of mics near the instruments, plug them into the desk. Like, I watched a very interesting video with Tiki Tane, who's the sound engineer for Shapeshifter, and
Mhm.
he has an entire wall of analog compressors and gates and EQs that he runs the entire mix through as though it's in the studio.
Mhm.
And people are like, I want that raw sound. I'm like, you don't. Trust me, you don't. You want the clean mix sound.
Yeah, that's like who was I? I was watching the mix engineer for Bad Bunny and of all artists, but it was a Waves. I think it was a Waves video, and that guy uses an entire like almost analog mastering rack to run the mix through,
Yeah.
just so it clean like it warms it up in her arena.
Yeah. And like when you're working with sound systems that big, you really need every frequency to be where it's supposed to be.
Exactly.
Because like I saw Fall Out Boy in Manchester once, and their sound engineer was like, I'll just run it through the channel strips on the desk. And it just sounded like brown noise for the entire show. It was horrible. And then he managed to blow the speakers out because he didn't know what he was doing.
That's beautiful. That's amazing.
Yeah. He got into an argument with me because I was trying to help him.
What's the next move for Thotcrime after Connection Anxiety's out? Um,
We're
are
not
y'all
really sure. We're
okay?
kind of like discussing at the moment. Because obviously we released the album. A week later, we hit the road for 2 weeks.
Right,
Um, and obviously, because I live in England, the girls live in America, meeting up for tours is kind of an expensive hobby.
right.
Um, and I'm still recovering from jet lag, and I've been back in the UK for over a week now.
Oh my God.
Um, so we're taking a little bit of time to sort of work out where we want to go. We've been in discussions for what we want to do for our next album since before Digital Drift came out. Like, we're the kind of people who are like, on the fifth album, and we're like, maybe we should focus on the second one first. But I mean, we're looking at playing live more, obviously, because we love doing that.
Mhm.
There's nothing that's more incredible than seeing an entire room of people going off. Um, we've got some ideas for like little extra cheeky things, but we need to talk to the label about it, and we need to talk to our friends about it and our management. Like presently, we haven't really got a lot of concrete idea.
Mhm.
I have been asking if we can get a signature Thought coffee blend.
Ooh.
We'll have to see how that one goes. But for now, we're just kind of going to be trying to promote the album as best as we can when we can't get full band shows going. So, we're looking at a few different avenues for that. Sorry, I'm being a bit cagey. I'm not
It's
sure what
okay.
I'm allowed to say.
Have didn't y'all put out a thought sauce as well?
We did. The thought source went down really well. Rich, our manager, was like, "Hey, this band that I know, and I think the Callous Boys as well. Don't
Mhm.
quote me on that. We're like, oh yeah, we worked with Soothsayer on this source, and they were interested in doing one with Thotcrime, and we're like, okay, we can finally make Thought Source a thing. Um, and they gave us a list of flavors, and we were like, well, that one sounds nice, that one sounds okay, and then we saw Cactus, and we were like, we have to go with Cactus. And yeah, that went down really well. We sold it on tour,
Mhm.
sold out of it on tour. Like people went mad for this stuff. Every time we stopped to eat, we'd be like, okay, I've got this burrito and I've got this thought sauce. And we had it on everything. And yeah, it was good. We
I feel
liked
like
that.
you could just generate so much content using that stuff.
I said to the girls, like, I am white as sour cream. When I go to Nando's, I have my chicken plain, and that's too spicy for me. So I said, we should make videos of me just putting this on anything. Like, I've got pizza and thought sauce. Let's see how I do. And then just watch the color drain from my face.
Is it super spicy?
It's not. It starts off with a bit of a sting.
Mhm.
Very sharp on the attack, but it mellows out really nicely and quite quickly to a very kind of sweet aftertaste.
Nice.
It almost tastes like a mild to hot salsa.
Mhm.
So, like, again, it's too much for me because I can't handle heat, but it is a very flavorful sauce as well.
Mhm. That's what I don't like hot for the sake of hot. I like flavor hot as well.
Yeah, we were very determined that we weren't going to get hot for the sake of hot because none of us are into that.
Mhm. Yeah, I just can't do it either. I'm like mayonnaise is spicy. So and my wife being Mexican makes things much more complicated because she cooks the mild version of things. I'm like, I'm dying over. I'm dying over here. I can't do it.
My German girlfriend puts, apparently, this is a thing over there. She puts cayenne pepper in bolognese. And the
Wait,
first time I had it, there were tears streaming down my face. My nose was running. I was like, can we not do the cayenne pepper next time?
yeah, that would get me too. Yeah, I mean, if it calls for cayenne pepper, it's just a little, just like a little. You flick it, and it comes just a sprinkle.
I want to be able to count the grains on one hand.
Seven, 17 grains of cayenne. It's too much. That's wonderful. Well, Oh, thank you so much for hanging out today.
Thank you for having me.
I hope that the jet lag mellows out and you're able to adjust properly before you have to come back over to North America and experience it all again. Um,
Thank you.
I have one last question for you before we go.
Yeah.
What's your favorite city for beans and breakdowns?
Nottingham. It's always got to be Nottingham. Best coffee in the world, best live venue in the world. You can't beat Nottingham, I'm afraid.
What is the venue?
Rock City.
That's so cool. I don't know what
Yeah.
that is, but it sounds awesome.
It's the place where Iron Maiden and Black Sabbath and Judas Priest used to go to do warm-up shows before they did their arena tours.
That's sick.
Yeah.
Have you played there?
Not yet, but I every year I'm like, Rich, book us shows in England, please. I'll do them as DJ sets if we need to. Just I want to play in England. I want to play in Rock City.
Thank you again so much. I hope that you have a lovely rest of your evening. I guess it's evening now. So,
You too, dude.
thanks for listening to this episode of Beans and Breakdowns. I want to say thanks again to Bo for hanging out on the podcast. Be sure to check out Connection Anxiety, the latest relief from Thotcrime. They also may have some dates coming up soon, so keep an eye out on their socials for that. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please subscribe and leave a review. You can find out more information about the podcast by following us on Instagram at Beans and Breakdowns or on the web at beansandbreakdowns.com. Until next week, be sure to stay caffeinated and wake the fuck up.